we have to come together. And I think something interesting is happening, if not now, in these next 5 years. And I think if we just manage to just turn the corner, you're going to see a return, an influx of South Africans coming back to this country in their droves.
I'm Carol Ofori, and this is the Carol Ofori Podcast for thought-provoking conversations. Almost a year ago, I came across a tweet which was shared all over. The tweet caught my eye and made me think. And because I'm a passionate supporter of South Africa and the continent of Africa in general, it has been sitting in the back of my mind ever since. Now, before I tell you who wrote it, I will tell you a little bit about what they said. This is how it started. For anyone thinking about leaving South Africa permanently, I'd like to attempt to share a balanced perspective on this topic as a well-seasoned traveler and someone that has lived away from home. I spend a lot of time in Europe, and whenever I visit, I'm always struck by a powerful quote. There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. On paper, there are many things wrong with South Africa. So many, in fact, that I don't blame people for leaving. The problem is, most people think the act of leaving is the solution, when really all they're doing is trading one set of pros and cons for another. The tweet goes on to say that wherever you decide to relocate to, you will either love it or hate it, depending on what you value. And I loved this perspective so much that I simply had to track down the guy who wrote it. So here is the founder and CEO of Like a Tourist. His name is Mark Sham. Now, Mark's goal is to get more South Africans to act like a tourist in their own beautiful country. I just love this so much. Welcome, Mark, to the Carol Ofori Podcast.
Wow, Carol, I'm definitely going to attempt to hire you in future to introduce me wherever I go. I think that was epic.
Well, it's all truth and it's all facts. And of course, that tweet has gotten me to this point where I need to sit down and find out more. I guess the first question I want to ask, since you are a globe trotter, where are you right now?
Right this second, I am in Cape Town. I recently relocated to Cape Town from Johannesburg about a year ago, but I have businesses in Johannesburg. So basically, when I'm not in Cape Town, I'm in Johannesburg or I'm in Europe.
Okay. So I guess let's go back. Where was Mark born? Where in South Africa were you born? Where did you grow up? And when did you start this travel life?
That's a good question. I was born in 1984, so I'm giving away my age, in Johannesburg. And I grew up in the south of Johannesburg for most of my life. But a very interesting occurrence happened to me at about 13 years old. My best friend at the time and his family relocated to the US. And I was a pudgy little bugger. I didn't have a lot of friends. So I was heartbroken when this friend of mine moved to the US. And I did everything in my power to convince my parents that they would match every cent I saved. I think they agreed because they thought I would save nothing at 12 years old. But I managed to scrummage together about 5,000 Rand at the time.
Wow.
So they painfully matched it. And I went and spent 3 months with this family in California for my 13th birthday, and it forever changed my perspective on the world. I just fell in love with travel, and ever since then I've been traveling largely around the world, but it was mainly because of the pandemic that brought me back to South Africa for what I thought was going to be 7 weeks, and it's been the longest 7 weeks of my life. And when we weren't able to travel internationally, but the provincial borders opened up, that was when I started flattening South Africa. And that was when I realized I barely know anything about this beautiful country, and I have to try to show other people the things that I'm seeing. And here we are.
So I'm assuming your love for travel, as you mentioned earlier, started at 13 when you got to live with this family in California.
Absolutely. You know, as a young kid, you grow up with American culture kind of rammed down your throat. But at the time, it was just top of the tops for me. So I get to the other side of the world. Everything is bigger, crazier, especially the US. I actually thought the rest of the world was like that. I found out later that really the US is just on a league of its own when it comes to big.
Yeah.
But what was so fascinating to me, and that's what stayed throughout my travel journey, is, you know, 1 minute you're in South Africa, the next morning after a plane ride, you're in a completely different country where people look different, they sound different, they act different, they speak a different language, their food is different, the way they think about the world is different, the side of the road they drive on is different. And so it's such a visceral experience, travel, that helps you understand how different the world is, and more specifically, It helps you understand that the way you live your life isn't the only way to live life, that there are multiple versions of this and none of them are right or wrong.
Now, let's go back to the tweet that's literally got everybody's attention, and specifically mine, and that's why we're speaking today. If you could summarize that tweet that went viral, what would you say?
Yeah, it was so interesting. Sometimes you pen articles like with deep intention. In this case, I was sitting at the airport in Paris, making my way back to South Africa. I had spent, I think, 3 weeks in Zurich at the time, and I'd had the most phenomenal time, but I started to notice, or I started to reflect more and more on the different trade-offs. Now, I've lived in London for 2 years. I've lived all over the world, to be honest with you. And so I think I have this unique perspective, especially as someone who lives between South Africa and Switzerland. You realize that for everything that's going well in Switzerland, things work, the economy is on heat, it's an incredible place, but there's also some trade-offs to that. And so I just started to think about all the people in my life who had moved from South Africa because they were frustrated with the status quo, only to return months or years later. And it's quite a funny thing. We talk a lot about people leaving, but we don't speak about them coming back as much. And when you quiz these people, what happened? They'll often tell you, not always, that they were running away from South Africa because they hated what they hated, but they didn't take enough time to think about what they loved. And so when you get to the other side of the world, you take a lot of the things that happen in South Africa for granted. And all I was trying to get across to the South African public, especially those that haven't traveled as much, is that we have this like grass is greener mentality to living abroad. And of course, there are amazing things that come your way when you live in a place like Europe or America. But there are also so many things that you lose. And I just want people that if they're going to take on the move, you might want to calculate it with less emotion and a bit more logic around what is it that you love and what is it that you dislike. Because then you'll suddenly find whatever you hated about South Africa, there's also so many things you love. And when you get to the other side, the things you hate aren't necessarily there, but neither are a lot of the things you love. And that's why most people come back. You talk to anybody who's returned after a few years and they'll keep telling you the same thing. There's no place like home. Now, of course, some people do move and they love it and they thrive that side because it happens to work out that whatever it is that they value was more apparent on that side of the world. And so I also don't think that just because you're born somewhere, that is it for you. That's where you must live. You know, I was born in Johannesburg, but it doesn't resonate with me as much as other parts of the world. So it's not that I don't want people to move. I think if that's your vibe, go for it. Just take this balanced approach in mind. And probably there's a better way to do it. Instead of just moving, you might want to go over there a few times and try understand it from a living perspective. But I mean, the point is they're huge trade-offs and we tend to think of things in absolutes. Like my solution to my problem is if I move. No, you're just moving. Let me give you an example if I may. I moved to London, but I was very clear about why I was moving. I love travel. So London is very centrally located in the world. You are 2 hours away from 50 world-class cities. The second thing I love about London is that it's the city of experiences. My goodness, whatever it is that you want to do over there, there's a market for it. So if you open up an app and you are searching for a Mexican restaurant, there's like 50 of them within 3 miles of you. So if you love experiences, you're really going to enjoy London. Okay, so what are the trade-offs? Well, first of all, the housing situation is that everything is 10 times smaller because you're living in a very densely populated city. So if you're going to trade it up for experiences, you must be okay with the fact that you're going to live in a much smaller house. Second of all, the weather is an obvious one. Like Johannesburg specifically and South Africa has some of the best weather in the world. You just got to know that if you're going to trade off to be able to be 2 hours away from 50 world-class cities, you also have to be okay with the weather is just not your vibe.
Yeah.
Things are also quite expensive in certain instances and so on. So for me, it was clear. I was like, I'm trading off this for this. But the more I came back to South Africa, I realized, wow, I really took familiarity for granted. I really took some of the things that we get to do here, the nature, that all of these things for granted. And so for me, that's all it is. It's just move if you want, just be aware of the trade-offs.
So for people to kind of understand why you're the person who's so qualified to have this conversation with me, I think it's important for us to know how many countries have you actually lived in and for how long did you live there?
So I've spent a total of 2 years in the US, but broken up into a few months trip. I've lived in London for just over 2 years. And as we speak right now, I move between South Africa and Zurich. So in about 3 weeks' time, 4 weeks' time, I'm flying back to Zurich with my partner, and then we'll primarily be based once again in Zurich for the next 4 or 5 months until it's warmer here in South Africa, and then we'll come back here. Aside from living in different places, I've traveled extensively, both internationally and locally. The whole Like a Tourist brand has helped me truly understand South Africa in a way that I don't think most South Africans understand. I haven't just visited Cape Town or Durban or the Kruger. I have gone to some small towns that most people, for example, don't even know exist. And so I feel like I've seen the true soul of South Africa over the last few years. And then because I tend to move South Africa, Switzerland, South Africa, Switzerland. You get this like snapshot of both. You know, in the next 2 weeks or so, I'm going to be completely juiced up on South Africa. And then I'm going to land in Zurich for 3 weeks. And then I'm going to have to come back to South Africa for a week. Then I'm going to be there for 4. So 1 minute you're in Switzerland, 1 minute you're in South Africa, and you get to put things side by side and look at them. I'll give you a great example. In Switzerland, everything works. I mean, everything. It's almost a complete version of utopia, but you would never think that there was a trade-off to that. And one of the weirdest trade-offs is that because everything works, because people have money, because the economy is on heat, I like to term it, there's like very little fears. People stay in their lane. In South Africa, I might be able to rally up support. We're going to do a beach cleanup. Well, in Switzerland, the beaches are clean. No one gets together to feed the hungry. And you might think I'm crazy when I say this. You might think, well, how's that a problem? Well, you underestimate severely the friendliness and the spirit of South Africans. Yeah, the second you arrive back in South Africa, you start talking to people in the bathrooms, at passport control, on the bus, you name it, and you can have fat conversations. In Zurich, you talk to people, it's almost like they're like, why are you talking to me? What is the matter? They just stay in their lane and spend enough time there. As a South African, you start to realize, but I miss the people. I miss that we talk to each other in the streets or in the elevator So I'm just giving you one silly example, but It's a huge trade-off. And if you, sometimes I spend 3 months on the trot in Zurich. I start to get to a point where as much as I love Switzerland, I am dying to come home. I'll take all the issues that we have just to see that friendly face. And I'm giving you one example. There are these massive trade-offs to everything that we do. And this is why I think more people should fall in love with South Africa.
Look, I think you've mentioned some amazing things. And I know that you don't have any kids. You've mentioned this before. But obviously someone listening to this podcast who has a family, a growing family, if you say something like Switzerland, everything works, surely as a parent, you would want to move to Switzerland to give your child the life where everything works, for them to be able to make a life for themselves, right? So I guess some would say, and I'm going to play devil's advocate because I absolutely sign up to everything you've said about this country and how amazing it is and how we shouldn't just leave, right? But I'm going to play devil's advocate. Somebody will say, all well and good, Mark, you get to live this like bi-country lifestyle where you get to live in South Africa enough to be fed up with South Africa and then leave and live in Switzerland enough to get fed up with Switzerland. You can say this because you're getting the best of both worlds. What do you say to that?
I would say that they're absolutely correct. Anybody who's got a small family and their main priority is safety, for example. If you feel that in South Africa you cannot satisfy your own safety needs, I would say to you, if that is your top priority, you should consider going. I just want you to know, though, that when you go, there are going to be many things that work for you and there are going to be many difficulties. When I moved to London the first when I moved to London, those first 2 years, once the gloss wears off of everything being new, you really start to miss familiarity. You start to miss that even though you bump into someone at a bar and you get talking, and even though you don't know each other well or you don't know each other at all, there's links into each other's lives. Oh, you went to this school. Oh, I went to the other school. Oh, yes, we competed against you in rugby. And then you get talking. So now you get to London, they're talking about the schools they went to, and you're like, oh, I went to school in South Africa. End of conversation. It may not sound like it's a big deal, but once you're over there and your safety is taken as a given, and now you're missing out on all those other things, that might be fine for some people because they're like, that's the price I'm willing to pay for the safety. And in which case, if that's your top priority, I say go for it. But if you are the type of person where your life is born of richness because of people around you, if you love the things that make us uniquely South African and you get to that side, you will find that your soul is slowly being eroded away because the life you had in South Africa, albeit with some safety issues, is gone. You've ultimately got to make a decision for you. It's amazing how many people overseas, South Africans, will give other South Africans a hard time for staying in South Africa. I can't believe those guys. If they only knew how bad it was there, how not normal things are back there, they would move. Okay, but what happens if people are simply okay with the quid pro quos? On the flip side, we tend to rubbish people who've left.
Yeah.
That's madness. Why are you giving someone a hard time? Do we give people a hard time from Joburg who moved to Cape Town, or people who moved from Durban to Joburg, or pick any scenario? Like, just because you're born in Durban or Joburg or Cape Town doesn't mean you have to live there for the rest of your life. So the fact that we give people a hard time for leaving is madness. I do think there is a stigmatism around a certain type of individual that leaves South Africa and then says all sorts of negative things around South Africa when they're gone. People don't like that. But the psychology around why people bash each other for leaving, staying, etc. is mad. All I'm saying to people is, if safety is your concern, move. But you are going to realize 6 months in, a year in, that you traded safety on the plus and you gave up a bit of familiarity, you gave up social, you gave up this. And if you're okay with that trade-off, winning. The problem comes in when people think that the solution is, if you just get away from South Africa, then all is solved.
How has the response been since that tweet went out? Have you found yourself being attacked by these two groups of people, the ones that have left South Africa and the ones that are still in South Africa? What has the response been?
The simple answer is that it's probably been about 90% positive. Because in the tweet, I'm not telling people what to do. I'm simply asking them to consider a few points of view before they move or when they move. And so most people are like, hey, you actually got a good point there. Some people pushed back heavily. The most prominent common denominator was people saying, yeah, just wait until something bad happens to you or one of your loved ones. You'll see things differently. And to them, I keep saying, if we stop sugarcoating things and we just have a raw, honest conversation, who am I to tell you that if you've had a horrible experience in South Africa that you shouldn't go? I'm simply telling you I haven't, and I still have faith. But I understand that if something happened to my mother or my partner or my siblings, I might have a different point of view. So I can only act from my point of view. I'm not telling you what to do. A lot of people said, I moved for my kids having a better future. And to them, I was so honest. I said to them, I'm not sitting on the fence with you. I think you made the right call. In fact, I take my hat off to families who make a move to a new country and they suffer all of the trade-offs in lieu of their kids having a better future. Do you get any more loving and thoughtful than a parent saying, I love it here actually, but I think it's better for my kids? You know, we all moan at people like that, but like, how selfless, how loving is that? I think that's remarkable. So most of the response was positive.
Look, I mean, I can understand your perspective from your lived experiences, you know, with regards to South African. It's no secret, I'm exceptionally passionate about South Africa. I'm exceptionally passionate about Africa as a continent. And for me, there just is no other option. Not because there isn't any. I just don't open that train of thought of leaving this place. Because for me, it's more than just better opportunities, better life. It's the core of my being. You know, being on African soil is the core of my being. So I can understand you know, saying things like, you know, you applaud families who take their children overseas to give them better lives. But from my perspective, it would come across of, I would give my children a better life in Africa because they can be connected with their roots, their ancestors, and their core. You understand? And for me, that's the future. But it rings back to your most important point, which is there's trade-offs. And you just need to decide which one you choose. What value do you have and what values are you chasing for not just yourself, but for your future and if you have offspring, for your offspring. So with that in mind, let's do a pros and cons list from Mark, right? The trade-offs that you've picked up. We know South Africa's got great weather. We know that if you're looking for security, you might get more security in Europe because there's less crime over there. Can you add to my list of pros and cons of Mzansi over living overseas?
Yeah, let me start by saying that I firmly hold the opinion that both you and I, Carol, can go to a restaurant.
Yeah.
We can look at the same menu and we want to order very different things. And there's nothing wrong with it.
Yes.
So that's why I have no qualm with people saying to me, the best thing I ever did was leave South Africa. Yeah. I'm like, good for you. That is amazing. I also have no qualm hearing Carol say, I believe the future is best for my kids on home soil. And I'm like, man, I love hearing that. That's cool. So for me, I don't think there's right or wrong. The only issue I take with anybody is when they have that, like, let me tell you how it is. It's like you don't get to do that. But okay, that aside, if you talk about pros and cons, so I'm an entrepreneur. I can speak from that perspective. I will say that despite how hard the economy can be in South Africa at times, because we're not as well developed as parts around the world, I actually think getting businesses off the ground in South Africa is an easier thing to do than abroad. If you look at places like Europe and the US, they're highly regulated. So, and I'm generalizing here, so please take everything I'm saying with a pinch of salt. If you're a small startup in either Europe or the US, there's so many things you need to get through. Let's say you want to set up a little food truck. I've actually gone down that road with some friends. Setting up a food truck in South Africa, outside of the capital costs, and setting up a food truck in the US or Europe, whole different ballgame. The amount of permits that you might need in Europe and the US is a totally different ballgame. But then the trade-off the other way is that should you get set up in a place like Europe or the US, you have a far larger addressable market. So again, you kind of got to pick. Whether we like it or not, in South Africa, the ability to hire people is certainly cheaper than in places like the US and Europe. But then we are held back down a little bit by some pretty crazy labor laws here in South Africa. It's pretty hard to fire people once you hire them. So sometimes we are a little bit gun shy for hiring people. So business for me, I think, is still an interesting one. You can certainly get moving. The cost of living in South Africa for people who have a certain amount of money is really cheap. And this is the difficulty for South Africans. We don't really live in one South Africa, do we? There's like multiple versions and multiple economies in South Africa. There's the economy for people who earn under 5,000 Rand. There's the one for people who earn between 5 and 20. And then there's the economy for everybody who lives over 20. And again, I feel the most for people who are in those lower brackets, because for them, life is far harder on the ground than the average person in the US or Europe. Minimum wages in Europe and the US are incredible. But then again, it's very hard to break out of that bracket. Things like eating out. So if you have some kind of disposable income, it is so much easier to eat out in South Africa or to socialize in South Africa. The price ratio of food to salary in the places like Zurich, if you just look at what people earn and you see what it costs to eat out, it is expensive. And if you come from South Africa and you eat out in Zurich, you want to throw up after you've paid that bill. Whereas in South Africa, although things are getting a bit more expensive here, it's incredible to still eat out here, to do your thing, even at the different levels of economy. I think like travel, it's so easy to travel across Europe. You can, like I said, 2 hours away from 50 world-class cities by plane. You can use the train. The transport systems are incredible. But then in South Africa, really just remarkable how our banking system is really well refined. Our telcos are actually really good compared to places abroad. Like in South Africa, if you have a little bit of money, there's so much you can do relative to a budget. There are places that you can still stay at for 300, 400, 500 Rand a night. But like in Europe, you can get somewhere easily. But goodness gracious, just even if you earn in euros, try stay somewhere. Airbnbs, bookings.coms, these places are you really have to be earning well to do those things. I mean, I think I could go like, obviously the safety thing is here, but people don't understand that it's not all roses that side of the world right now either. And we're not on the border of Ukraine and Russia. We don't have to worry about a nuclear bomb coming our way.
Yeah.
In South Africa, we have a lot of autonomy to live our lives kind of separate from government. You have to say one thing about South Africa, like whatever your political relationship is with the governing body at present, we can act and live far more autonomously as human beings. Whereas in Europe and the US, again, everything is regulated. There's so much more stuff you can and can't do. There's so many more rules. Places like Australia is a super nanny state. You trade security for, you can't install your own inverter because you need a specialist and you need to complete this form and it's just crazy. So when you get there, that's how you're like, but why would I need to pay a person just to come look at this plug? And they're like, well, that's the rules, mate. That's how we do it here.
Geez, I think if we had to do this comparison list, we could go on forever. I think when we make decisions this huge, we just think of the immediate gratification we'll get to say, phew, we're no longer here. We're not dealing with load shedding anymore, or the fact that we don't have water anymore, or crime, or whatever. But negating the fact that when you get on the other side, maybe there are other things that meant so much to you. I relocated from Johannesburg to Durban, and it's not far. I mean, 6 hours drive or 30, 40 minutes by flight. But the one thing I miss about Johannesburg is the buzz of the city. Just the va-va-va-voom of everybody just chasing something and wanting it. Here I'm at the beach, people are a lot more relaxed, and that serves me too. So you'll get all the way to another country and pick up the small things that you didn't think made your day every day, whether it is driving on the highway and seeing the ocean on the left and the weather is pristine and amazing, or whether it's just hearing that South African accent. I know whenever I've traveled for long durations, as soon as I touch down at OR and I hear that South African accent, my heart just warms. Or if I'm walking somewhere overseas and I hear someone with that accent, I just smile and want to greet them immediately. But these are things you kind of don't think about when you make this decision. And I think this podcast is going to help a lot of people in getting to that point of, is this the right decision for me, whether it's to go or to stay?
Look, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the example that you use between Joburg and Durban, people love to give Joburg a really hard time. But the truth is, there's like millions of people who live there willingly, who could move, and they don't want to, because for them, that energy and electricity is the thing that they value. I love the Western Cape. It's been one of the best moves I've ever made, because I became very clear about what I value. I love being out in nature more. I love having it on my doorstep and what have you. But I tell you, whenever I come back to Joburg, there is something about it that I was just there yesterday for the day, and it was just like, oh, I love this place too. And that's my point. I think it's okay to feel like that. But the key is to become hyper clear about what you value. And South Africa, unfortunately, is riddled with the problems, and those problems sometimes make you act out in an emotional way. And the funny thing is that there's that spotlight effect. My good friend Brent Lindyque talks about it all the time. Like, once you highlight safety issues in your brain, it's not to say that they aren't there, but now you are looking for them. And so people get to this point where they've just fed up. I've had enough of South Africa. And it's kind of like this emotional move there, this decision that they make. And then everywhere they look, you see how things work overseas. See, we've got this problem here. And I've seen this time and time again, that when people go overseas for long enough, because they left in the hut, they now calm down from that emotional state, and they start to realize all the things they took for granted. Some of them stay and stick it out. Some of them come back. And I'm so grateful for the ones who come back. I'm also grateful for the ones that stay. I think like you should just do you. And we would do ourselves a massive favor in realizing that there's no solutions, only trade-offs. And further, the more you travel, I promise you, in general, the more you fall in love with South Africa. Carol, you are so right to feel that South Africa, despite all its problems, has so much going for it. It's the gift I wish I just want to give it to people so badly. South Africa may have its problems, but it's one of the most beautiful countries on earth. It has the most incredible people. Try to put it in perspective that out of all the people that live in this country, there are 1% of them, 2%, pick a small number, that are bad apples, and they ruin it for everybody else. But for that small percentage, there's the 95 to 99% of South Africans who are the most incredible, warm, friendly, giving, kind people. And that's why you spot it. That's why when you're overseas, you hear an accent and you're like, oh my God, I feel home. When you come back to South Africa, with all its problems, you arrive at our Tambo and Eskom's push tells you that there's load shedding. And you just like, I'll take it. I'm so happy to be home. There's a reason. Like, I just want the other people to know there's a reason. These people haven't lost their minds. All I try to beg people to do is just travel a little more in South Africa. I've got two sayings that I live by these days. The soul of South Africa resides in small towns. The more you visit small towns across South Africa, you realize the true nature of South Africa. And you realize that South Africa is not Cape Town. South Africa is not Joburg. It's far broader than that. And then beyond that, I keep telling people that travel will help you heal your broken relationship with South Africa. You will see it in its entirety, and you won't get caught up and angry. Imagine all you did was drive up and down Bryanston Drive every day. Of course you want to lose your marbles. But when you get out, and I know I'm talking from a privileged position, I'm aware of it when I say this, but if you can just get out, get into a car, road trip with 3 friends, I don't care what you have to do. You take 2, 3, 4 days, you will see the South Africa you're just so used to in your box is not the South Africa that exists out there. I feel so strongly about this. Yeah. This is the place. But I get why people may want to go.
Yeah, 100%. Everything you said is just so incredibly true. I mean, something as simple as just taking a drive out. We're in KZN. Safaris are just like lollipops at the playground,
yes.
at the fair. We have safaris. Like, listen, I could leave now and say, I'm going to book into a lodge and go on a safari. Now, in like an hour, I'll be on a safari. This is something you can't do anywhere else outside of the continent. So yes, I absolutely agree with you. There's just so much. And for me, this conversation sparks so much for me in the sense that I just feel like as South Africans, coming from the history that we've come from the dark past, and we're just sort of painting this rainbow of a beautiful country. We're winning international accolades on world stages, and we doing it with passion, with gees, with the South African vavavavum, you know. And for me, it's so heartbreaking that we've come from this long journey of having a democratic, beautiful South Africa, that at this point, when we should be enjoying the fruits of that, we shouldn't be leaving. This is the point where the golden goose has laid her egg, and we should protect this egg, and we should keep fighting for better, beautiful days for this golden goose, you know? And so that's the space I'm kind of in. Just like with life, you'll go through the challenges, you'll go through the tough times. Once you stick it out, on the other side, you will see why it was all well worth it. And we live in a country that reminds us every day why it's well worth it. The fact that political parties can fight it out in court, and that's where the verdicts are made, and not in countries where if you disagree with a political party, you're thrown in jail or you go missing. You literally go missing. Or you're a businessman and you say something wrong about a leader, and next thing the businessman is no longer seen. You know, we don't live in that world. We live in a great world here in South Africa. So yes, I love the fact that you're echoing that. But I guess one question I have to throw at you as we sort of wind down this conversation is, what are your last words to anyone listening right now with regards to, you know, your position on Mzansi and relocating as a whole?
Oh, God bless you. Okay, here, listen to me, people. Listen to me good. I'm the first to talk about the fact that South Africa has its problems, and they are many. I think you have to be living under a rock to not know about all the things that impact us. But I am telling you, as someone who travels all over the world and also all over this country, I genuinely believe that South Africa is worth fighting for. The only thing I can tell you is that I'm putting my money where my mouth is. Right now, I'm invested in South Africa in a big way. We would need to go on the brink of civil war and famine for me to get up and leave completely. I have the ability right now to just hop over into Europe and stay. I don't want to. I'm here building with the people, being part of the solution. I think we're coming to an inflection point as a country. If not this coming election, the next election. We've never been at this position before, and I'm not trying to get political, but we've never been in a position where it's so wide open before. And so people have to earn their votes. We have to come together. And I think something interesting is happening, if not now, in these next 5 years. And I think if we just manage to just turn the corner, you're going to see a return, an influx of South Africans coming back to this country in their droves. So if you want to leave, no problem. Just do your homework. But I tell you, there's enough people in this country that love it here and they want to be part of the solution. And that alone, that should make your heart just a little warmer. That, and please stop reading bad news.
Mark, you couldn't have said it any better. Geez, thank you so much for chatting to us on the Carol Ofori Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, having spoken to Mark about the trade-offs of living in another country, I decided to speak to someone who is living this right now. Now, he's the former East Coast Radio program manager and a very good friend of mine, Zane Derbyshire. He immigrated to the USA. Thank you so much, Zane, for joining us on the Carol Ofori Podcast.
Thank you, Carol. Thanks for having me.
So tell us, how has it been, the whole transition from leaving Mzansi to the land, as many may say, of milk and honey?
You know, if I say it's all been really easy, that would be a complete lie. I think there were some really dark days in the beginning, particularly around the fact that I wasn't working. So we moved here for an opportunity that my husband got. And he was working for the company for a couple of years already. So he was in it and working and doing his thing. And I was sitting at home doing laundry and cleaning the apartment. And it was just really strange. Not things that I was used to, you know. I was working 12-hour days typically back in South Africa, and not having anything to do really almost drove me off a cliff. And I think the one thing that frustrated me as somebody who had built up a great reputation in South Africa, when I got to the US, nobody knew who I was. Right. And so applying for jobs becomes really tricky, because I think when you're looking for jobs at a management or more senior level, it's very difficult to just apply online. You know, you need to know people, you need to be able to reach out to your network, you need to be getting introductions. When you don't have a network, that's really hard. So those first days were really dark, really complicated. At one point, I was saying to my husband, like, have we made a mistake? Like, is this the wrong thing? Should we go back? Anyway, and as things progressed, found a job, very good job. I'm really, really happy working with a great company, and that's made a huge difference. In terms of the general feel of the US, I love it. We live in Atlanta. It's a bustling city. The culture, the life, just quality of life is really so good. And that's really been a big plus for us.
Yeah.
And it's It's actually made it really easy, to be honest.
Yeah. So tell me, for those who don't know, how long have you been living in Atlanta for?
Almost 2 years, in fact, to the day. Next week will be exactly 2 years that I've been here.
Wow.
And it doesn't seem like it, to be honest. It still feels like it was 6 months ago. But I also look back at those dark days and I go, wow, it wasn't actually that dark. It wasn't actually that long. It was fine. Part of growing, right?
Yeah, part of growing. So speaking of growing, the trade-offs, was it worth it?
150%. Yes, it's been really good from a quality of life perspective. And Carol, I hate to sound like one of those naffy South Africans who live overseas, but allow me a minute. The general anxiety that you live with in South Africa, one day you wake up and you go, I feel a little bit less stressed. What is that? Well, there's no power cuts. There's no water issues. There's no continual infrastructure challenges. There's no taxis pushing you off the road. There's no switching on your electric fence and the beams in your garden and checking that your doors are locked. I mean, we slept with our patio door open for 3 days without noticing it was open. And we weren't stressed about it. I unpack my car and I don't have to close the car and go inside, take stuff in, go back, unlock the car, take more stuff. I just leave the car open. So it's a very different lifestyle in that sense. A lot of people will say they miss the grit of South Africa. And I certainly miss the cosmopolitan, mixed up culture that we have in South Africa, because that's so beautiful. You can't replicate that anywhere in the world. But those negatives that I've mentioned, I do not miss them at all. I mean, when we moved here, one of the funniest things was I was telling my friends, it's so strange. People can walk up to your front door because there's the road and then there's the sidewalk and then there's your garden and then there's your front door. There's no fence, there's no gate, there's no beams. And in the beginning, that was a little bit strange because people would walk past and you'd say, hey, yeah, there's someone past my window while I'm watching TV.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that was quite strange in the beginning. But again, when you look at it in context, you go, why are we living like that in South Africa? Yeah. Why are we caging ourselves up? And that's not the reason that we left. I mean, we left because of a great work opportunity, a great career move for my husband. That was the reason why we left. But when you are removed from the situation and you start to see the wood for the trees, you kind of go, wow, it's really insane. I mean, when you tell Americans, like when you sit around with your friends, you're hanging out and you tell them about security and armed response, I mean, they can't even get their heads around.
Wow, that's insane, Zane. So you sound like you don't miss much of Mzansi. Don't you miss us? Like, is there anything you miss about South Africa?
I miss my friends and my family, obviously. And the time difference makes it a mission. If it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I want to call my mom and say, how's it? It's 11 o'clock at night in South Africa and she's asleep. And those are the trade-offs that you make when you move to another country, especially when you move to another country in a different time zone. And your friends will sometimes not phone you because they're not sure if you're awake, or they will say, hey, I'll phone you sometime, we must catch up. But you never do, because when you're phoning them, it's nighttime there and they're having dinner with their families, or it's early in the morning, or whatever the case is, right? And so that's a trade-off that you make. But honestly, do I miss living in South Africa? No, I don't.
Wow. Okay. That is crazy. I didn't expect that response from you. You are one person who lived in many cities in South Africa. So you know South Africa pretty well, from PE to Durban to Johannesburg. You know this country very well. And my ultimate final question to you is, would you come back to Mzansi?
It's such a difficult question. And to be honest, Carol, a great question, because I've thought about that a number of times.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, I grew up in Plettenberg Bay, lived in PE for a while, lived in Joburg for a while, lived in Durban for a while. I even spent 6 months in Cape Town. So I really know the country exceptionally well. And I have no ill feelings. I have no oh my God, South Africa. Would I come back for the right opportunity? Probably, but it would have to really be the right opportunity.
Okay.
I am very ambitious, as you know, and so I would definitely consider the right opportunity. But as it stands right now, I mean, we've just bought a house. We moved into our new house last week, and so we're not looking to come back at this point. But never say never.
Never say never. Well, Zane, thank you so much for weighing in. I will be honest, I didn't expect that response from you. And I think a lot of people are going to listen to podcasts are going to be like, wow, I was expecting you to say, yeah, I would come back. I miss the biltong. I miss speaking Afrikaans with my friends and family. I miss. But yeah, this is your lived truth, and we thank you for that.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Zane. Have a good one.
You too.
And so now I have someone who left South Africa and then returned a few years later. Durban resident Tyron Hansen. Thank you for joining the Carol Ofori Podcast. Tyron, how are you?
Hey, Carol. Yeah, very well. How are you?
Oh, very, very good. So I believe you and your family relocated. Where did you relocate to and how big was your family?
My family and I, we relocated to Canada. When we left, it was my wife and I and two of our kids. And then we had a third child while we were across in Canada.
Oh, wow. Okay. And how long did you stay in Canada?
So we were there for 8 years. We moved across in 2014 and then moved back in 2022.
All right. Now I'm curious. What was your stay like in Canada and why did you come back?
Yeah, so Canada's it's a great place. It's a nice place to live. It's an easy place to live. And we really enjoyed our time there. But, after 8 years, we felt like we'd almost achieved what we wanted to achieve. We'd been able to see that part of the world and things went well for us over there. But it really was a case of coming home to get back to family. We found that especially over COVID time, you were so isolated and just being so far away. It was so difficult to have any meaningful connections with family. And we just saw how over that time, our kids' relationships with their cousins, with their grands, aunts and uncles just really became less and less. And it was very important for us to come back and just restore that connection and get the kids back to what we consider home, what they consider home. And just rekindle those relationships with family and get back to the South African lifestyle.
Right. So what was the ups and what were other things that were not so great?
Yeah, so there were a couple of good things. I mean, the nice thing, we were 45 minutes from the US border, so we're able to travel a lot through North America, go take our kids to Disney World on more than one occasion, going to Vegas, to New York. So we're able to do all of that. So that's very positive. The negative, the first thing that always comes to mind with Canada is the weather. And it is true. It's, you've got 3 months of the year that are lovely. And the rest are cold, anywhere between a little bit cold to very cold, just depending on the season. And having to adjust to the climate is a big one. The other thing is the sport and the culture is just very, very different. We're really passionate about cricket, rugby. And over there, you really have to make the mindset change into things like baseball or ice hockey, kind of sports that you don't have a general affinity to. So it's just not the same going across and almost adopting a team in a sport that you're not that used to, compared to the culture of being sport loving as we are here in South Africa and in Durban.
Right. And many people would say that, leaving South Africa and going and staying in a country like Canada, you get so much peace of mind because obviously the crime there is a lot less. But, we go back to the trade-offs, right? So you have security, but on the other side, you're saying things like, you miss the fact that you can discuss a rugby game with a friend or two. What else would you say feeds into missing home that landed you back home again?
Yeah, sure. And Carol, just to clear up as well, you're right. Everything's very orderly. There's less crime, but there's also a lot more rules that you always had to adhere to. And you almost get a sense in South Africa that rules are guidelines or suggestions. There's so many rules that you always have to follow. And the difference
like
is
what? Like what kind of rules when you say rules?
So, for example, silly rules like my kids in South Africa would run around barefoot all the time and we take them to shopping centers and they'd be barefoot. Over there, everyone always wears shoes the whole time. And if you don't have shoes, you kind of, you're asked to put on shoes or you aren't allowed in specific areas. Also, just, even if you go into shops and if you're doing something with your kids, for example, that the general public doesn't agree on or doesn't think you're doing good parenting, which by your standards are great, someone will come up to you and let you know, no, you shouldn't be doing this or you shouldn't be doing that.
Oh, wow.
I remember the first time we were in one of the shops and the kids were sitting on the side of the trolley, which is, something which is pretty normal. And someone came up to us and told us that, no, some child had fallen over and broken his head. So the kids aren't allowed to sit on the side of the trolley within the shopping center. So everything's it's not just, the police or the regulators telling you, it's the community as well, that they have rules and they're very much followed and endorsed, I must say. And yeah, the other thing, when you're going overseas, you tend to go across to earn other currencies and stronger currencies, which is great. But you are also giving up on a lot of luxuries that you may have here just as a normal day of life. So, for example, we always had 2 cars here in South Africa, my wife and I. When we went overseas, we had to start the first 18 months, 2 years with just 1 car My wife would drop me off at work in the morning, fetch me every evening. And so you go without. We're also very lucky to have like domestic workers that help in our house. And then you give that up. So a lot of luxuries, even though you're earning a stronger currency, specifically when you start out in a new country, you do often have to give up on all of those before you're able to build up within that currency.
The main thing I've been picking up here is, in this particular podcast, is that it depends on what you value and what you don't value. That makes the living overseas either really bearable and wonderful or really unbearable and not wonderful. And I guess it leads me to my next question around, you've made that decision. You lived there 8 years, you came back. Was it worth it, those 8 years?
Oh, definitely. No, I wouldn't give them up for anything. The experience that you have, both on the business side, on the work side, on the personal side, on the travel side, really those life experiences. Yeah, 100%. I would do it again. We were very lucky to get the opportunity to go. But we also got to that point where after 8 years, we realized we'd done it. We'd achieved what we needed to achieve. And it was time to come home. So definitely don't regret a moment while we were in Canada, but are also super happy to have returned back to the place that we consider home.
Tyron, what I'm getting from our conversation is that you didn't leave South Africa because you're fed up and done with South Africa. You left for an opportunity. And I think a lot of people, when I say a lot, please, spice, sugar, all the things, throw it on top. But a few people, when they make the decision to leave, it's because they're angry. South Africa's hurt them in some way and they are over it. What do you say to people who are making this decision to leave the country because they have been hurt and not because there's opportunity there?
Yeah, it's tough to speak for them on their behalf. You summed it up really well. We did go because we got a great opportunity. I was able to go with my work and take the kids with me. So we were very lucky to be in that fortunate situation. In terms of those that just want to leave because of something that's happened to them or happening with them, yeah, it's tough to speak on their behalf. But if they feel like that's the solution, again, I would say go out and try it out. But what I can also say is it's very often a case of, choose your pros, choose your cons, choose your poison, because there's no perfect place out there. Every place does have its issues. I can promise you that. It's just a case of what you are willing to tolerate and what you are willing to live with or live without.
Oh, that's so awesome. I love how you've put it. Is there anything else you feel like you want to share about your experience having lived in Canada for 8 years and coming back to Mzansi and our craziness? Because you got to love our crazy. Our crazy is different, but you got to love it.
Yeah, exactly. No, for sure. And again, that's why we came back. I'd say for anyone looking for the opportunity, just be prepared that you are going to be different when you go there specifically. You've got different accents. You may look different, act differently. So there's definitely that transition period. But again, if you want to do something like go overseas, try it out, I'd say go ahead and do it and make the most of it. And yeah, you only live once. So, make a decision and go for it. But then again, come back if you want to.
Come back if you want to. Tyron, thank you so much for chatting to us. It's so nice to hear the perspective of, someone leaving the country because there was opportunity and not really going because they don't ever want to see this nation again. It's a really beautiful perspective you put in there, that chase opportunity, chase growth, and when you feel like you've said you've fulfilled it, come back and enjoy a good braai and some load shedding and some
great weather.
And some great weather. Couldn't have said it better. Tyron Hansen, thank you so much for chatting to us. All the best.
Thanks, Carol. Bye-bye.
Bye. That's the Carol Ofori Podcast. For thought-provoking conversations, listen at ecr.co.za under podcasts or your favorite podcast app.